How's it going, YouTube? Coming today with another video, and today, guys, the video is going to be where to Handtrap post Agov. I really do hope that you enjoyed today's video. It's going to be a bit shorter, but it's going to be very information dense because I'm focusing on only like 6 or 7-ish decks today. I really want to go in depth into where to Handtrap, where to interact with those decks, because there's going to be a lot of different things that you have to consider when you are Handtrapping. And it's going to be one of those things where it's like whatever you see first, but we'll go in more depth about that. If you want to go ahead and check out my sponsors over on Gem, Dragon Shield, Imperium, or Grimoire, all the links are down in the description below. Also, go ahead and join my Discord. It's growing every day, and I really like to see everyone in there. We are 100 subs away from 19,000 and the announcement of my 20,000 giveaway, and I believe it's like a $250 gem giveaway as well. So definitely go ahead and enter that in the community tab. But we are 100 away, so definitely subscribe to the channel if you're not already. We're on our way to 20,000. Let's grow the community as much as we can. It's so exciting. Now, the first thing I want to talk about today is going to be a small reminder. Now, my favorite card is Droplet. Now, Droplet is coming back into the format tenfold right now. Something that you really have to remember is that there is a bit of a workaround Droplet. So this is something that a lot of people are really familiar with, so I just want to remind everyone, since it's back out now, is that if you have 2 monsters getting negated, if you remove one, Droplet will then resolve without effect. So if you have like a Chi and a Baron, and then your opponent hits you with Droplet on both Chi and Baron, you flip Blackout and get rid of your Chi, your Baron will not be negated. Droplet has to negate the number of cards that it attempted to negate. So just remember that. It's a really important tip to know, especially with Droplet being back in the format. Dodge some Droplets because that card's going to be really popular. The first thing I want to talk about today is going to be Unchained. Now, this is pretty minimal, but there's a lot that I want to say about this too. So DD Crow is going to be the card that you really want to play right now. I'm on Drewswarm at the moment, but I'm going to be switching to DD Crow probably after the Agov set drops. There's a couple of reasons for this, and one is because Unchained already has a line that I've been kind of hearing about. I don't know how great it is, but at least to try to play around Drewswarm on Yama. Whereas DD Crow is actually going to come up quite a lot in this next format. And again, there's not really a play around for DD Crow. Like, it's just going to be there, right? Whereas Abyssal, if you have no monsters, then your opponent can't hit you with Abyssal. So I think that DD Crow is going to be really important, especially DD Crow on Yama. This is just a really important one to hit here, especially giving your opponent not as much grind game as they want. Now, the other thing is Valor or Imperm on Sarama. You don't want to hit things like Torgai. Don't really want to hit Yama, because these are cards that are just going to get massive value anyways if your opponent chains like Shavara. This is something where I'd rather go for like an ignition effect like a Sarama, because when it hits board, your opponent is trying to get their trap back, trying to pop another card, and this is where you can get maximum value by making your opponent pop that card without getting the effect on board. Then your opponent has to find a way to get it back on board and go through a lot of different ways to try and combo off. Whereas if you just Valor Imperm, I would just hit the Sarama. Post side, honestly, I'd probably be taking out Valor Imperm because it's not that good. But in a game 1 scenario, if you have nothing else that's like better, it's still fine to have in, because there's a lot of times where you can negate like a Yama and it'll go through. But at the same time, if you are going to hit anything with Valor Imperm, I highly recommend just going ahead and hitting the Sarama, because again, it's an ignition effect. So your opponent can't just go on summon effect and then change Shavara and go max value on you, you know? So it's definitely the best one here. Asher is going to be very generically good in this matchup. For anything that blows up, you know, you can go ahead and just put your opponent into weird situations where if they like blow up something that they need the summon off of, then you can go ahead and Ash there. Usually the line is going to be something like put a monster on board and then get a Ruha to like pop that monster, so you can summon the Ruha and then summon out like the Sarama from deck too. So there's always going to be really optimal spots to go ahead and Ash. I'm probably just Ashing the first summon effect from Grave. It really depends where your opponent's at though. If they like normal summon Tour Guide, summon a Rhino, and then they summon a Yama, I'm probably going to do the destruction effect after that, because I think that's going to be the best one to not allow your opponent to get to a Ruha so easily. So you definitely got to kind of watch what your opponent's doing and gauge from there. But again, if your opponent summons Tour Guide, I wouldn't really interact with that. I don't think it's very good for multitudes of reasons. Especially if you have like Valor Imperm and then your opponent has Shavara, then you literally wasted a card. So keep that in mind when you're playing against Unchained. It can be kind of unpredictable as to where you want to go. But this deck doesn't have a lot of really good interaction points. It just has a lot of ways you can go ahead and like break a board. Like if you're afraid of getting hit with Caesar, then just save Imperm for your turn and just negate Caesar and go about your day. All right, so the next one here is Purrely. So Purrely hasn't really changed much. Notably, the deck is still pretty good, but at the same time, I don't really care when I play against this matchup. I play a lot of hand traps, usually like Droll or Imperm and Veiler are really good in this matchup. So just going ahead and using your Ashe, Veiler, Imperm on Purrely is usually enough. If you see my friend drop first, then I'm just going to go ahead and Ashe that. Otherwise, if Lily hits the board first and all I have is the Ashe, I'm probably just Ashing the Lily and hoping my opponent doesn't have my friend. It's just the first one that hits the board between my friend and Purrely. DD Crow, again, just being very notably good here. With the Purrely target in the graveyard, you can go ahead and just Crow that. This is the matchup where you really want to have Xyz Encore in your side deck. The card's really solid at dealing with Noir. It's just another way to make sure that your opponent doesn't get multiple draws because you can rip it right away in the draw phase, which is really solid. Not allowing your opponent to go standby phase and draw a million cards. That's always everyone's favorite thing, right? That's one thing I'll never let happen again. As long as I have Xyz Encore, you know? Seeing your opponent draw 6 is just like, wow, this is unfortunate. So definitely make sure that you have DD Crow for the target in the graveyard, Veiler or Imperm for the Purrely on board, and then Ashe for my friend or Lily, whichever one hits the board first. Now, Labrynth, this one's really interesting. This is another reason why I say DD Crow is really solid. I know that you're probably noticing a lot of talk about DD Crow, but I'm not trying to just sell you on the card. I'm just trying to tell you exactly why I think it's going to be that good and all the different instances where it really is that good. So one thing that I heard was that Labrynth was using Welcome Labrynth first to summon Lovely so that you cannot go ahead and negate the big welcome, but I can almost promise you 9 times out of 10, your opponent's going to be activating Big Welcome first, because that implies your opponent opened Welcome and Big Welcome at the same time. And if your opponent has like all the furniture in their hand, like Coup Clock plus furniture, they're 100% setting Big Welcome. So this is something where you definitely want to have Bell, because Bell is super solid for Big Welcome. But one thing that Drew Swarm does not do for you is when your opponent goes pitch Coup Clock and then pitch like Chandelier, you cannot Drew Swarm the Coup Clock coming back to the board, but what you can do is DD Crow the Coup Clock, which a lot of decks only play 1. Sometimes you'll see like 3, but a lot of times you'll only see 1, which this is a crazy stop, because if you banish the Coup Clock, not only is that card just gone forever, they also cannot use Big Welcome on their turn, like their turn 1, because they don't control a Labrynth. So using DD Crow there is kind of insane. This is something that you definitely want to be on top of, you want to know. DD Crow is going to be such a good card next format. Ashing Welcome or Big Welcome, Belling Big Welcome, of course, and then Veiler Imperm on Ariana. This is always going to be the most solid spot. There's not really anything else that you have to do this on. If your opponent flips Big Welcome on your turn, you have Imperm, and you have 6 cards already, I'd probably just Imperm the Lovely so you don't like have something else ripped that you really want, right? But other than that, there's not really a better time to Veiler Imperm other than Ariana. But definitely make sure the DD Crow on the Coup Clock, it's very solid. The next one here, Floowandereeze. I was just talking about this on stream. I'm also live right now. If you want to check out my stream, it's twitch.tv/GG_YGO. Hopefully one day we'll get the GGYGO, but you know, we'll see. We were just talking about this though, but Lancia is such an amazing card against Floowandereeze for a multitude of reasons. So the first thing is that your opponent can't use Pot, they can't use Map, Advent. If they go to tribute summon Empin, they lose their birds to the graveyard. So that's already crazy because your opponent gets Empin Trap. Trap doesn't do anything if they don't have any birds. So unless they have more birds in hand, it puts them in a super awkward spot. So just dropping Lancia in draw phase is fantastic. And I like this a lot more than Zombie World because it's something that you can just use right away when your opponent's going first. And this card really does put a wrench into anything that Floowandereeze tries to do. So I highly recommend playing this card. It's also very good against Rescue Ace. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. And then also I do feel like we'll probably end up seeing a little bit more Runic lately. So I feel like Lancia would be even better in that regard because now you have another card to shut off all your opponent's cards, which is very, very cool. Veiler Imperm on Eglin, this never changes. It's just the best one to hit. You can save Imperm for your turn on Empin, but it's probably fine to just hit the Eglin. Now, Ashe is going to be another situation that you're kind of going to have to gauge the situation. If your opponent is playing Floowandereeze, there's a high chance that they could have bricked because the deck does have a problem with that. So you can just Ashe Advent. If it's the first thing they do is activate Advent and banish one, I'm definitely Ashing that all day. If your opponent opens up with Pot of Extrav, you kind of have to guess on what you want to do there because you can always hold the Ashe if they like just normal a bird. But if you let them draw into Map plus bird, that Ashe literally never mattered. So I'm probably just going to hit the Pot card immediately if I see it, especially if they open up like Pot of Prosperity. Ash is like not that good against this matchup, but it is really good. If they ever have like Robina or Eglin they just summon without a chain link, then you can just Ash and usually they'll just pass. But if they open up with Advent, you're Ashing that. If they start off with Pot, probably Ashing that. And then if they just solo summon a bird by itself, you're always Ashing that. So it really depends on whatever they start with. And then again, just Valor Imperm on Eglin. It's never really changing. Now for Chimera, this is something that I haven't really covered in full detail yet. I kind of went over it real quick in my minute-long Where to Handtrap. But you want to Bell or Meister the Chimera fusion. This is really solid. It's very reminiscent of Drytron whenever they had Meteona's Drytron engraved. If you Bell or Meistered that, they just lost because they couldn't summon Ultimateness, which was really funny. It's very similar because then your opponent just doesn't have fusion to summon Chimera on you. Of course, they could have opened up the second one, but I mean, the odds of that are still really low. Ash on Sword Knight is still going to be the best one. Stop ashing Branded Fusion. It does nothing. Unless you're afraid of like Sanctifier and you saw your opponent have it. Other than that, just ash the Sword Knight. It's so much better. Imprimer Valor on the Baphomet. If only you have is Ash, you're just going to stop the Sword Knight anyway, so that's already going to be out of the way. But if your opponent gets to summon that Baphomet, you can go ahead and just Valor Imperm that as well. Notably, if your opponent has like Fusion Armament, then your opponent can summon out the old Baphomet, and then they can go ahead and use things like Codal to protect their Baphomet, which is really cool. Other than that though, Rescue Ace with the DLL Star cards, this is something that we're really going to have to look at and make sure that you're prepared for. Again, Lancia is really solid. Your opponent can't summon Turbulence or Preventer unless they have like Emergency. They also can't banish things like Emergency out of their graveyard. There's a lot of different things that are really solid with this. You can Bell Alert, which is really cool. That's a nice interaction, but you won't always have Bell, as it's not always like the craziest card unless like Labrynth gets really popular, even though it's already pretty strong. Having Bell is nice, even at like a 2-of set in the sideboard. Ash will be on the card on the left here, which is the original Sinful Spoil Snake Eye. This card allows you to pitch a card from your field for cost and then summon a level 1 fire from deck. This is the card you want to Ash. If your opponent has Emergency, these cards are interchangeable because they essentially get you to the same thing. Emergency gets you to Turbulence, the other one gets you to Hydrant. But again, this is another deck that can brick pretty hard, and Sinful Spoil makes you neg 1 real hard. Unless you're just getting rid of the Diabell Star, then it doesn't really matter too much. They don't really care at that point. But they already got to pitch a card to like summon the Diabell Star as well. So they're losing a lot of value, especially if they have to go like neg 3. So something that you really want to consider. But ashing the Snake Eye on the left here is going to be really solid. And then of course, Emergency, you can't go wrong ashing that either. But either one of these cards are going to be a really solid spot to ash. And then Valor Imperm on Turbulence, of course. You want to make sure your opponent doesn't get to do anything with that. The set 4 is still very strong. The last one here is going to be Tearlament. Now, this is Horus tier. A couple things we got to talk about here. So, ashing the card on the left here, it's the Horus that allows you to pitch itself and a card to search the Sark and draw a card. You will always ash that. 100%. If you see it come down, you'll ash that. Ashing Shiren's always really solid too. If your opponent opens up a Shiren, potentially you're just going to ash that instead. But if your opponent opens up with the card on the left here, the Horus, you're just going to ash that. Now, what happens when you ash that is very dependent on what you do with a DD Crow. If your opponent goes Horus card plus Kelbeck or Agito, that's cost. So you have a choice. You can either save DD Crow and prevent your opponent from getting into like Zombie Vampire by like trying to get rid of some of the names engraved, because your opponent's going to play 3 different Horus cards, a 1/1 and then a 3 set of the one on the left here, so just 5 total. But so if your opponent goes Horus, pitch Kelbeck or Agito, since it is cost, you can DD Crow the pitched Agito or the pitched Kelbeck, and then it won't resolve because it wasn't engraved at the time of resolution. So you kind of have to be mindful of what your opponent's pitching. So again, if they pitch Kelbeck or Agito, chain DD Crow and just get rid of the Kelbeck or the Agito. Your opponent will get the Zombie Vampire, but if you already have like a Valor or a Imperm to match up with these two, then they're probably just going to pass because you just Valor the Zombie Vampire and there's not a whole lot more they can do. Your opponent's already losing a lot of value. So definitely something to consider, but ashing on the Horus is going to be the more correct spot here. Ashing on Shiren's always going to be fine. Valor Imperm on the Zombie Vampire. Tyr never really had a great spot to go ahead and Valor Imperm since Kit was gone. So this is really solid. This is something that really gives you a spot to just go ahead and use that. And then Bell and any of the tier names is fine. But if your deck struggles against like the shufflebacks, you might want to just hold Bell or even Meister if you're playing that for Caldo or Medora, just to make sure that your cards can't get shuffled back, because we all know how annoying that can be, especially if you're playing a deck that, again, really cares about your graveyard. So I do hope that you enjoyed today's video. A lot of very important things to talk about. If you have any questions, definitely let me know down in the comments below. A lot of different spots that have a lot of, well, if this happens, then I need to do this. And so you kind of have to like adjust on the fly. But I do hope that you did learn something today about like what's coming in the new format, because a lot of it is just consistency to do what we're already doing. Nothing's like super crazy as far as like a really high power ceiling. It's just more cards to do the same things that we're already doing. We don't have cards like Chaotic Ruler, so like D-Bellstar is going to be like that wild. It's going to be good to like get to Hydra and have consistency, of course. But overall, I don't really think anything besides T-Fon and Little Knight are going to be like absurdly strong, right? So that's something to really consider. I wouldn't really be too worried about Agov. The format's going to change, but it's not going to like massively like pote change, you know? So again, I do hope that you enjoyed today's video. If you haven't already joined my Discord, Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, or if you want a coaching session or a Metafy, definitely go ahead and do so. PM me on Discord if you have any questions, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Thank you all so much.